Montana Territory, November 1864. The earliest winter winds swept over Black Creek Ridge with a warning in their howl, whispering through frost-tipped sagebrush and rattling the barn siding like a restless ghost. The land stretched wide and unbroken in every direction, raw, untamed, breathtaking. And at its center stood a woman who matched it in spirit. Millie Black tightened her coat against her small frame and breathed in the sharp, metallic cold of the coming storm. This ranch had been her world since birth. Its dust in her blood, its wind in her bones, its heartbeat synced with her own. 100 horses, 60 cattle, 300 acres of stubborn land that only answered to someone equally stubborn. And that someone was her. She wasn't big, she wasn't loud. She wasn't a man, but she knew every inch of her father's legacy, every fence post, every trail, every foaling stall, and she protected it fiercely. She had to. The sun broke over the ridge, washing the pastures in pale gold as Millie guided Scout, her bay mare, toward the lower fence line. Frost glittered on the rails like silver dust. Behind her she heard a familiar voice grumble. "You know Arthur Mount came snooping again yesterday?" Jim Turner, her foreman of nearly 20 years, pulled up beside her. His beard was more grey than black now, and his joints popped louder than his saddle sometimes, but he remained as steady as an ox and twice as loyal. Millie huffed through her nose. "I heard." Jim spit into the frost. "Persistent bastard, I'll give him that." "He wants what he can't earn himself," she muttered. "My horses sell better, my cattle are stronger, my name carries weight and his doesn't." Jim shot her a sideways look, careful, hesitant. "He don't seem like the kind to back down. Millie, I know you hate hearing it, but if you were to marry—" "No," she cut sharply. "Not this again." He lifted both hands. "I'm just saying, men out here don't respect a woman alone." "They will respect my shotgun," she snapped. Jim sighed heavily but let it drop. "Let's get this fence finished. I'm cold, I'm hungry, and I'm too old to argue." Millie watched him ride ahead, the morning wind tugging at his hat brim. Beneath her irritation, she knew he wasn't wrong, but better alone and free than married and erased. Later that morning, the feed mill was crowded, men stamping cold feet and blowing on their hands as Millie pushed through the door. She barely had time to take a breath before a broad, solid shoulder collided with hers. "Oh, ma'am, I'm so sorry." Warm, steady hands caught her arms before she could fall. Large hands steadied her by the arms, warm even through her coat. Millie looked up, annoyed, ready to snap, and her breath tangled in her throat. He was young, maybe her age, maybe a little older, unruly brown hair, a strong jaw dusted with stubble, and eyes bluer than a summer lake. "I didn't see you," he said softly, still holding her. "Are you all right?" She swallowed, suddenly aware she hadn't breathed in several seconds. "Yes, I'm fine." He smiled, slow and genuine, and offered his hand. "I'm Samuel Hitchens. Folks call me Sam." Before she could take it, a smug voice entered the conversation. "I'd watch who you're knocking over, son. That woman owns one of the biggest spreads in the territory." Arthur Mount. Millie tensed instantly. "I heard you were sniffing around my land again, Mount." He smirked. "Just making you an offer. Everything's for sale." "My ranch isn't." Mount leaned in a little. "You'll change your mind." "The next time you step foot on my land," she snapped, "you'll be staring down my shotgun." His smile faltered, barely, but it faltered. Sam looked between them, clearly uncomfortable. Millie turned away, chin high. "Bob, load my feed." She walked out without looking back, but she felt Sam's eyes follow her. She hated, deeply, irritatingly hated how much she liked that. 2 days later, she and Jim were brushing horses in the barn when the sound of hoofbeats echoed outside. Millie stepped to the door and instantly recognized the rider. "Sam." He dismounted nervously. "Ma'am," he said, lifting his hat, "you probably don't remember." "I remember." "Too quick, too sharp." He blinked. "Well, I was wondering if you had any work available. Been turned away from everywhere else. Winter's coming fast." Millie crossed her arms. "What kind of work you looking for?" "Anything with cattle, horses, fences, whatever needs doing." Jim stepped beside her, studying him like a horse at auction. "You have experience with ranch work, son?" "Yes, sir." Worked on ranches most of my life. Was up north until recently, but they don't need me anymore." "You'll have to work hard," Jim warned. "We don't keep lazy hands." Sam straightened. "No, sir, I'll give you everything I've got." Millie studied him, tired, road-worn, hungry, but those blue eyes were steady. "I'll give you a chance." she said at last. You start in the morning. Bunkhouse is that way. Supper's at 5 sharp. His face brightened. Thank you. Truly. As he walked off, Millie told herself she'd barely notice him. She was very wrong. Over the next weeks, Sam proved himself. He rose before dawn. He rode the outer fence lines alone. He mended boards without being asked. He worked cattle like he'd been born to it. He laughed easily with the ranch hands. He handled horses gently and confidently. He never complained, and Millie tried desperately not to see him. But she did. She saw him brushing his horse, sleeves rolled up, unruly hair falling into his eyes. She heard him humming, terribly but warmly, while mucking the stalls. She saw the way he always touched his hat when he passed her, shy and respectful, and she noticed, against her will, the nights he rode into town, likely to the saloon, likely to women she had no right to care, but she did, and every time he left for town, jealousy burned through her like a hot coal. One quiet night, Millie sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, watching the stars and trying not to think. The wind was calm for once, drifting through the tall grass with a gentle shiver. Footsteps approached. Evening, Millie? Mind if I join you? Sam asked, tugging his coat tighter around himself. Millie nearly said no. She should have said no. Nothing good could come from letting him sit beside her. But her heart made the choice before her mouth could. I don't mind, she said softly. Not going into town tonight? No, he said, settling beside her. Town gets boring. I usually go for cards and maybe a drink or two. He glanced over at her, eyes warm. Besides, there are more interesting things here. Heat rushed to her cheeks. She looked away quickly. So what made you want to be a ranch hand? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady, trying to talk about anything other than the way his presence made her chest tighten. They talked for hours. Sam spoke of his father, a cruel drunk who drove him from home early. Ranch work had given him structure, dignity, a place to belong. Millie told him about her father, the ranch, and how she'd learned every chore and every challenge by his side. This place is all I know, she admitted, and all I've ever wanted to do. Sam listened, really listened, and she felt something crack open inside her. The next evening they ended up in the hayloft together, wrapped in another wool blanket, the stars glittering through the open loft doors. They talked in low voices, late into the night, the air warm with unspoken feelings. It's just innocent friendship, she told herself, just someone to pass the time with. But even as she repeated the lie, she knew she was falling, and fast. The sky turned heavy and steel grey the day before Thanksgiving. Jim, Millie said urgently, riding up alongside him, round up the cattle and bring 'em in close. Storm will hit by nightfall. Already on it, he said. Sam and Tom are prepping the barn. Millie hurried there. Sam was shoveling hay into neat piles. The cattle are coming in, he said. We've got 3 water troughs filled and the hay stacks ready. Good, she said, lifting a heavy bucket of water. It sloshed dangerously against the rim. Here, let me. It's fine. But the bucket jerked and Sam reached out instinctively. Their hands collided, warm, calloused, familiar now in a way that made her heart throb. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Millie's breath caught, his lips parted as if to speak, or kiss her again. His eyes dipped to her mouth. A spark raced straight down her spine. She pulled away quickly, flustered. Put it in that stall, he did slowly, quietly, and with a lingering look she felt even after he turned away. And that was when it happened. A heavy beam, propped carelessly against the barn wall, shifted, tilted, fell. Millie, run! She froze. Sam lunged. They hit the ground in a tangled heap just as the beam crashed beside them, kicking up dust and straw. He hovered over her, arms braced on either side of her head, chest rising hard and fast, face inches from hers. You all right? He breathed. I think so, she whispered. She could feel his heat through her heavy clothes, his breath on her cheek, his eyes searching hers with a hunger she felt mirrored in her own chest. Then slowly, irresistibly, he leaned in. His mouth touched hers, soft, questioning. Then deeper, hungrier, certain. Her arms wrapped around his neck, her legs tangled with his. Her body arched without thought, until the shouts of men echoed from outside. They scrambled apart instantly. Millie, Jim called. Coming, she answered, breathless, face flushed, heart pounding like a wild thing. Sam touched her hand once, just once, before letting it go. She wished he hadn't. For the next 3 hours, Millie pretended her lips hadn't just been kissed, truly kissed for the first time in her life. She pretended she wasn't aching to feel his hands on her again. She pretended she didn't keep reliving the heat of his body over hers, the way his breath had mingled with hers in that suspended heartbeat before reality intruded. She failed miserably. That night, the blizzard struck with a fury that shook the shutters of the house and whipped snow sideways across the ranch yard. By morning, drifts climbed over a foot high against the fence rails. Millie bundled herself into her warmest coat and trudged across the yard, boots sinking into the packed white. Sam was already in the barn. Of course he was. "Morning," she said, her voice stiff and brittle. "Morning." He brushed snow from a horse's back, then paused. "Millie, we need to talk." "No," she said quickly. Too quickly. "We don't." "We do." He took a step closer. "What happened? Was a mistake." She saw it hit him physically, like he'd taken a blow to the chest. "A mistake," he repeated, stunned. She swallowed hard. "Yes. Millie, what we shared was beautiful. It meant something. It doesn't matter," she said, looking away before her eyes could betray her. "It meant nothing." "It did," he whispered, voice cracking. "Your arms around me, your kiss, I wanted to see what it was like. That's all." She couldn't believe the words spilling out of her mouth. They tasted like ash. They felt like betrayal. Sam stared at her for a long, agonizing heartbeat. Then he stepped back, pain darkening his eyes. Without another word, he walked out into the storm, leaving her standing alone in the cold, dim barn. She sank to her knees in the straw and sobbed, heavy, silent tears racking through her, because she had pushed away the only man she had ever wanted, simply out of fear. That afternoon, the ranch gathered around the long oak table for Thanksgiving dinner. Normally, Millie loved the holiday. The smell of turkey cooking, the warmth of the house, the chatter of her ranch hands sharing stories from the year. But this time she felt hollow. She pretended to enjoy the meal, laughed at the right times, and spoke when spoken to. She tried not to look at Sam, seated far down the table, but her eyes kept drifting in his direction anyway. Several times she caught him watching her. Every time she saw sadness in his eyes. Every time her heart twisted. When dinner finally ended and everyone dispersed, Millie rose to slip away to her bedroom. "Millie, wait up," Jim called, quickening his steps to catch her. She paused, swallowing back fresh tears. "Yeah." "What do you need?" she whispered. Jim studied her closely. "Millie, I've known you your whole life. I watched you grow up. I'm damn proud of the woman you've become. I don't know what happened between you and Sam, but I can tell something is wrong." She stared at the floor. "Don't throw something good away," he said softly. "You might be throwing away your only real chance at happiness. Life is a lot better when you've got someone to share it with. Take it from an old bachelor, being alone isn't all it's cracked up to be." He touched her arm gently and walked away. Millie stood frozen for a moment, then hurried to her room, collapsed onto her bed, and cried until sleep finally found her. 3 days later, the blizzard finally lifted. Jim, Millie, and the men were finishing breakfast when the kitchen door burst open and Sam rushed inside, breathless. "You need to come. Now," he said urgently. "We caught one of Mount's hands trying to poison the cattle's water." Millie shot to her feet. This time there was no hesitation. Millie and Jim ran for the barn, boots crunching through the snow. Inside, several ranch hands stood in a tense circle around a man tied to a post. He glared at them defiantly, jaw clenched. "What's your name?" Millie demanded. The man spat at her boots. Sam lunged forward, fury blazing in his eyes. But Jim caught him by the arm and held him back. "Fine," Millie said coldly, turning to one of her ranch hands. "Get the branding iron. We'll see how brave he is when—" "Okay, I'll talk," the man shrieked, fear instantly overcoming bravado. Everyone froze. "Mount sent me," the man admitted in a rush. "He's getting desperate. His horses ain't selling like he hoped. The ones that are selling aren't bringing enough. The bank's threatening to call in his loan. He'll do anything to get a hold of this place. Figures if your cattle start dying, you won't be able to make it through the winter. Maybe then you'd be willing to sell." Millie's hands shook with anger, not fear. The fury burning through her eyes made several men take a small step back. She turned to Jim. "Gather the men," she said, voice low and steady. "This ends today." An hour later, Millie, Sam, Jim, and a handful of ranch hands crouched along the tree line overlooking Arthur Mount's ranch. Snow blanketed the land in deep drifts, and several of Mount's hired guns stood guard outside the house and barn. Horses were saddled, ready for a quick escape. "Why don't the men go around to the backside of the property?" Millie whispered. "There's deeper snow there. If they stay low and crawl through the drifts, they might get close without being seen." Jim frowned. "Too risky. Not enough cover. But the drifts are over 2 feet deep in some places," she insisted, "and the slope behind the barn gives them an angle. They can use the snow like a shield." Jim glanced at the men. They nodded eagerly. They wanted revenge every bit as much as Millie. "Fine," he said. "Boys, you heard her. Swing around the back. Stay low. Don't shoot until you hear us fire." The men disappeared into the snow. Minutes dragged on. The cold bit at Millie's cheeks and nose. But she stayed perfectly still, watching Mount's ranch with narrowed eyes. Finally, Sam whispered, "They're getting ready to leave." Millie didn't wait. "We stop 'em." Before anyone could argue, she stepped out just enough to fire a warning shot into the dirt near the front porch. Chaos erupted. Men dove for cover. Gunshots cracked through the cold morning air. The sharp smell of gunpowder filled the wind. "Down!" Jim yelled. Millie ducked behind a fallen tree. Her men were already circling wide, using the drifts to stay hidden. One of Mount's men sprinted for a saddled horse. Sam rose to shoot. The man fell, but almost instantly, Mount fired back. Sam staggered, dropping to his knees. Blood bloomed across his shirt near the shoulder. "Sam!" Millie scrambled to him, propping him against a rock. Her heart nearly stopped at the sight of the blood soaking through her fingers. "Go," he rasped, gripping her wrist weakly. "Get them. Don't worry about me." Her hand shook as she pressed a handkerchief to his wound, and then, without thinking, she kissed him. Hard, desperate, raw. "No dying," she whispered fiercely. "Not on me." He managed a weak laugh. "I'll try." Millie stood, fury igniting every nerve in her body. She fired once, then twice, keeping Mount and his men pinned down. Bullets whizzed past her head. She dropped low and crawled along the tree line, there cursing the bare winter branches that offered almost no cover. Smoke from the gunfire drifted thickly, turning everything into a blurry haze. Through it, she saw one of her men get hit in the leg. He dragged himself behind a tool shed before Mount's man could fire again. Millie reloaded, breath sharp in her chest, ready to move, and then the sound burst through the chaos like salvation. Hoofbeats. Dozens of them. She whipped her head toward the ridge behind them. The sheriff and a posse of townsmen crested the hill, rifles raised, faces hard. Millie's chest flooded with relief. "Mount!" the sheriff thundered. "We have you surrounded. Put the guns down and come out before anyone else gets hurt." For a moment, silence. Then, one by one, Mount's men began to emerge with their hands raised. Finally, Arthur Mount himself stepped outside. His face was pale. His hands shook. Millie could tell he'd never meant for it to go this far. She almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Finally, it was over. Millie dropped to her knees beside Sam, her breath fogging the cold air as she took in the sight of him, pale, shaking, blood soaking the torn fabric of his shirt. "It's over," she whispered, pressing the cloth harder against his wound. "Mount's done. We need to get you to a doctor." "Bullet can't stop me." He grunted, attempting and failing to sit up straighter. "Don't move," she scolded firmly, her voice cracking despite her efforts. Sam smirked weakly. "You always this bossy?" "Only with people I love," she said before she could stop herself. His eyes widened. Shock, hope, confusion, all flashed across his face. "You love me?" She nodded, tears spilling freely down her cheeks now. "I lied before. I was scared. I thought if I let myself love you, I'd lose everything I've built. Someone once told me that none of it matters if I have no one to share it with." She touched his cheek gently. "I didn't believe it until I met you." Sam cupped her face with a trembling hand and pulled her into a slow, aching kiss. "Then share it with me," he whispered. "Let me help you. Let me love you." She kissed him again, her answer pouring from her lips into his. 1 month later, Millie stood in front of the small mirror in her room, smoothing the cream-coloured gown over her hips. Snow fell softly outside the window, blanketing the ranch in quiet winter beauty. Evergreen boughs and red buffalo-plaid bows decorated the yard and the small chapel beyond, a festive celebration of both Christmas and new beginnings. Jim stepped into the doorway, eyes gentle. "Well, I never thought I'd see the day," he said gruffly, though a smile tugged at his lips. "Your father'd be proud of you, Millie. You've done so much on your own. Now it's time to let someone share the load. Sam's a good man. Millie smiled, warmth filling her chest. I know, she whispered. When the chapel doors opened, Sam was waiting at the end of the aisle, dressed in his best coat and looking at her like she was the only woman God had ever created. His eyes, those impossibly blue eyes, shone with awe, devotion, and something deeper. Home. Her steps were slow but steady as she walked toward him. Every doubt she'd once carried melted away. Every fear dissolved. And that night, when he finally kissed her without hesitation, without fear, without holding anything back, Millie Black understood completely what it meant to belong to someone and what it meant for someone to belong to her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. She didn't want to be, and she never would be again.